I'm Steve Wilkerson, and I'm with David Royse, Executive Editor of the News Service of Florida. David, Governor Scott is advocating a $2,500 a year pay raise for teachers. They haven't had such a raise in a long time. Why is he doing it?
That's the $2,500 question, I guess.
Yep.
Is Governor Scott, has he genuinely come to the realization that teachers are hardworking people who are underpaid and who are important to the success of the state of Florida and its students and accordingly the state as a whole? Or is it $2,500 spent on buying votes of teachers in the next governor's race, in which he may or may not face Charlie Crist, who's well liked by teachers? Who knows which of those it is? I think you could look at a couple of things to try to answer the question. I think that Governor Scott has genuinely become very interested in education over the last year. Whatever his motive, he certainly has talked quite a bit about the need to improve the education system. He went out and he went around the state and he talked to teachers and parents, and he went to PTA meetings and things like this. They took video of it and made sure they sent out press releases, and I think part of that was aimed at public relations. But I think he probably listened and probably learned something, maybe including the fact that teachers feel underappreciated. Now, it's worth pointing out that one of the reasons many public school teachers feel underappreciated is that the governor's party, the Republican Party that's in charge of the legislature, has spent several years talking about how to make it easier for students to go to alternatives to the public schools because the public schools aren't doing so well. So rather than talk about how you fix the public schools, a lot of the rhetoric from the Republican side of the legislature has been, well, let's talk about charter schools, which are public schools, but they're not the traditional public school. Things like back during the Jeb Bush administration, vouchers to, if the public school is no good, get your kid out of there, send them to a private school at taxpayer expense rather than fix the public schools. And so I think teachers hear things from the Republican Party and say, we're under attack now.
And they've been graded, by how their students do.
That's right. And
the schools have been graded, so there's been a lot of accountability focused on teachers.
Right, and I think a lot of teachers do feel under attack. And $2,500, well, how far will $2,500 go to alleviate that feeling? I don't know. I also think that that Governor Scott spends a lot of time on the phone with business executives from other states, primarily trying to get them to move to Florida. I can imagine, I don't know this for a fact, but I can imagine that one of the things that Governor Scott hears when he talks to executives in other states about what it would take to get them to consider moving a company to Florida or expanding in Florida, I'm sure the conversation comes up about, well, how good are your schools down there? I think if Governor Scott hears often enough from executives of other companies, look, if we're going to move our people down there, we got to be able to tell them that the schools are good. That maybe he might become more and more interested in fixing the schools. He's all about fixing the economy. And, business says all the time, the economy is tied to education. And when you have a good education system, you have a sense that the education infrastructure is strong, you typically have a good economy. And so I think it's entirely possible that Governor Scott is coming at this entirely authentically as part of a way of his vision for fixing the economy of Florida by making the educational system strong. Now, you start with $2,500 of teacher pay raise. That might be a convenient political move in a year in which he's got to woo teachers as voters.
Well, how much does that $2,500 per teacher raise cost?
Yeah, it's $480 million, and that's the big, this could all be a useless conversation for you and I to have right now, because it could be that at the end of the session, it didn't happen. Who knows whether the legislature will make the sacrifices in other parts of the budget to find $480 million to make this happen. Back to what we talked about earlier, and accountability that you brought up, this might also not happen because there are some legislators, Republican legislators, including legislative leaders, who are not totally on board with this because they want teachers to be paid based on a merit pay system. And when the talk turns to how do you pay teachers and how do you reward teachers. Most Republicans in the legislature have spent the last few years trying to convince people that it's important to reward the good teachers and not necessarily reward all teachers across the board, and not reward mediocrity or poor teaching. So, I mean, for the governor to come out and tell those legislators who have spent political capital on saying, we want to shift to a merit pay system, to now come out and say, well, actually, we need an across-the-board raise. Now, the governor said he's still interested in merit pay, but he wants to start with this $2,500 across-the-board raise. It puts him in an awkward spot with the members of his own party in the legislature, and some legislative leaders have said so. They've said, well, we still want to talk about merit pay rather than just an across-the-board pay raise.
Well, there was a Republican governor who vetoed a merit pay bill, right?
There was, and a lot of teachers remember
name?
Charlie Crist.
And
most of the teachers in this
state...
state...
might be running as a Democrat this time.
You're getting a little ahead of things, maybe, but probably not. Charlie Crist is widely talked about as the next possible Democratic candidate for governor. He, of course, was a Republican when he was the governor of Florida right before Rick Scott, and he vetoed this merit pay bill, which endeared him to teachers. It was one of the things that many people said was sort of, one of a series of things in a long line of Charlie Crist's move to the left. It made him a pariah in the Republican Party, which he eventually left, but it endeared him to teachers. And we talk about teachers. It's important to say, I guess, that, teachers are not a monolith. There are some teachers who like Rick Scott. There are some teachers who do not feel under attack by Republicans. There are many Republican teachers. So getting that out there. But generally, a lot of teachers were really happy about the fact that Charlie Crist vetoed that merit pay bill. And of course, Charlie Crist then was no longer governor. Rick Scott comes in. They pass the bill again. Rick Scott signs it. And now we're sort of trying to get into this merit pay system. So if Charlie Crist comes back and runs as a Democrat against Rick Scott, and it's looking like that's a very good possibility, here's your number one educational issue right up front, $2,500 pay raise.